everyone. This is Patrick Spencer. Welcome back to another Kitecast episode. I'm here with my co-host, Tim Freestone, the CMO over at Kitecast. Tim, how are you doing this morning?
Good. How you doing, Patrick?
I'm doing well. It's Friday, so we're excited to wrap up another highly productive week. Tim, we're joined today with a special guest, Chris Rose. He's a partner over at Ariento, a leading B2B cybersecurity, IT, and compliance service provider. The team specializes in delivering best-in-class technology solutions that are secure and regulatory compliant. In his spare time, Chris serves as an instructor at UCLA, where he teaches a course on cybersecurity and privacy for managers and professionals. His areas of expertise include cybersecurity maturity model certification, which is a hot topic right now in the marketplace, obviously, DIV regulatory compliance, among other things specific to the federal government. Chris holds an MBA, a master's in computer science from UCLA, as well as a bachelor's degree from Cal Poly. So, Chris, we're really excited to talk to you. We're looking forward to getting your insights into what's happening with CMMC, but some other things in regards to the regulatory space. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, likewise, Patrick, Tim, appreciate you guys having me on and look forward to it.
So we were talking about this before we kicked off the podcast. Your organization's a C3PAO. Sounds like something from Star Wars. If you're not familiar with the CMMC space or regulatory space in general, what is one and how do you become one?
Sure. Yeah. So it's C3PAO stands for CMMC, Third Party Assessor Organization. And really they stole it from FedRAMP, which I know you guys are FedRAMP authorized, so you're familiar with kind of the C3PAO model. But with all the new CMMC stuff, the big change, or one of the big changes, is the government's not just going to take defense contractors' words for kind of what we call the self-assessment model, self-reporting. They're going to have independent third-party assessors come in, and so as part of that, there's a whole ecosystem they're building out, and you have to get authorized by the DoD and the Cyber AB, who is the kind of body that's going to manage the entire assessment process for the entire defense industrial base. So the process is really you apply. You have to go through kind of an entire background screening, make sure U.S. company, there's not some sort of foreign malicious interest, and then we actually had to go through an assessment with the DoD's Cybersecurity Assessment Center called the DIBCAC. So we had to go through a CMMC level 2 certification assessment equivalent with the DoD to be authorized after we got through all the screening and everything to be able to go out and do the same assessments to their contractor base.
So tell us a little bit about Ariento. The company's been around since 2014. You're a partner there, I believe, the founder or co-founder of the organization.
Yeah, we've got really two sides of our business, and we're most of us are former military, kind of federal government contracting, so kind of the CMMC stuff was a natural fit for us. But one side's our managed services side of the business, geared more towards kind of the SMB market. In the case of CMMC, SMB, government contractors, which is a lot of the defense industrial base, is less than 100 employees. And then the other side of our business is more of kind of an upmarket, kind of larger enterprise size clients to mid-size. And that's more of a traditional consulting and that's the side that is the C3PAO doing a lot of the assessments. So kind of the managed services side is the, hey, we'll help you, achieve the compliance and go through the assessment with you. The advisory and consulting side is the going in and actually doing the assessments, and we think the synergies work pretty well in terms of being on both sides.
And you guys have been probably super busy for about the past year or so with the OMB announcement from what's been 4 weeks ago. Maybe be helpful to give the audience a little update on what that means. But have you seen an uptick in business in the last 3 weeks after OMB said you have 60 days perhaps before you need to comply?
Yeah, the CMMC journey has been a interesting one with lots of ups and downs, as I'm sure you guys know. we are now back in an uptick, right? So there's CMMC 1.0, then the interim rule, then they pull back the interim rule, then CMMC 2.0, then rulemaking getting pushed out, and then all of a sudden, kind of they come out of nowhere last month, like you said, and they submit the rule finally to the Office of Management and Budget. That starts the clock, like you said. And so with that, there's 60 days, 90 days, they can extend it 30 days. But basically, by the end of this year, we should know if OMB has either sent the rule back to the, approved it and sent it back. It'll go through public comments and everything, but send it back to the DoD to implement kind of how they see fit. Or if there's some reason that it doesn't align with kind of like the president's objectives and stuff, they could reject it, send it back to the DoD. The DoD would have to resubmit. So bottom line, beginning of next year, we should have a pretty good idea if this thing's back in the DoD's hands to kind of roll out, as they see fit.
So to your point, though, it could go back and we're just waiting again, right?
It could, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so we've been through, with this journey, and it definitely has been a journey, right? There's been administration changeover that it's made it through, and I think, I'll speak personally for myself. I think that the take here is that cybersecurity is one of those not very polarizing topics, right? Kind of everybody's kind of behind it. I think this is something that this is following on the DFAR 7012 requirement to assess against NIST 171. So it's not new. It's just kind of adding that inspection arm. It's also breaking it into kind of multiple levels to be a little more reasonable for certain contractors. So I think, our thought is yes, it is the government. Yes, it is taking time. There's been lots of ups and downs, but I do think that the support is there. And I would be surprised at this point if they say it doesn't align with the president's objectives, because that's really the reason that they'd kick it back. You look at what's coming out of the White House these days, and it is a lot of, software, cybersecurity, supply chain cybersecurity. So it seems like we're getting closer to the finish line, but hey, you never know. It's the federal government after all.
How about Rev 3, right? Is that going to mix things up? What's the status there? What do you expect to see happen?
Yeah, so one of the things, so I mentioned that there is a current requirement, right? So the DFARS 252.204-7012, right? The beauty of the federal government is everything has to be in writing, and if it's not in writing, then it doesn't really exist, right? And if you can find something in writing, you can make an argument for anything. So, this was January 2018, I believe. The DoD started rolling out this DFARS clause in their contracts, which essentially said, if we think we're going to be giving you controlled unclassified information, which is what most of this is all about, right? And controlled unclassified information is it's proprietary information that the government marks, right? It replaces the old FOUO, if you're familiar with that program. Obama kind of did that to replace it, but it's no different than Kiteworks saying, hey, we're going to have this partner, and we're going to put a contractual obligation in it that says if we label anything proprietary or sensitive or however you guys want to label it, we want you to do these things to protect it, right? And so that's what this is all about. So there's a current standard right now. It's just a self-attestation standard, number one, right? Number two, it says, so you have to do an assessment against yourself. You have to report your score to the government so that they can see it on record, which kind of sets you up for we've started to see companies be pursued under the False Claims Act, right? If they do report a score that's maybe not correct. You have to, if you're using the public cloud, right? This matters, for you guys for sure, and your customers. And I know you guys are FedRAMP moderate, but you have to be using a FedRAMP moderate or equivalent cloud service provider. And then there's some reporting requirements in there if something happens where basically the DoD can come in and take all the evidence. So that's kind of where we are now. And that is all based on NIST 800-171. Right now it's Rev 2. So getting back to your question, and that's been in place since, like I said, January 2018. So this is nothing new. When CMMC came along, really what they were looking to do was add the inspection component. This is no longer a self-reporting attestation, right? We're going to have somebody come in and look at you. And they kind of broke up NIST 800-171, the controls, to say, hey, you know what, if you're just a landscaper on Camp Pendleton, we're not going to give you controlled unclassified information. So maybe you only have to do like these 17 controls, right? So, so but when the DoD, so they came through with CMMC 1.0, and then with 2.0, really what they did is they signaled and actually said it. Hey, we're going to align. We think that CMMC or something like it is something that could be a federal government standard, not just starting in the DoD. So we're going to better align with the federal government, and the federal government is, National Institute of Standard Technology putting out these publications. So I think, to get back to your question, yeah, Rev 3's come out. It had its period of comments. Now they're taking it back for kind of revision and looking at it. I think that's just something where, that'll just be the updated standard. It's not terribly different, a little more focused on supply chain, but it aligns well with CMMC and kind of the vision of, hey, they're going to point to NIST for these security controls.
So right now, I'd imagine in your role, you're sort of consulting, advising. You're not assessing yet, correct? Because the rule isn't final.
So we are doing what are called joint voluntary assessments.
Okay.
With the DIBCAC, so with the DoD Cybersecurity Assessment Center, so that the same folks that same group at least that assessed us to be able to come and authorize C3PAO. There's a pilot period right now where we will go into, for companies that want to volunteer to do this, we'll go in and lead an assessment with the DoD there as well, and it's kind of a 2-for-1's the wrong term, but I think that's the thing that people understand the most. What it is it's technically a NIST 800-171 assessment. Again, same security controls, right? And the DIBCAC will report and give them a score and report that score to the supplier performance readiness system, right? So they're going to get, under the current world that we live in, they're going to get that NIST 800-171 assessment. At the same time, because we're leading the assessment, we're doing it from a CMC level 2 standpoint, which again, very similar. And the idea, this hasn't been formalized yet, but the idea that the DoD has said, that what they're looking to do in the final rule is anybody that went through one of these, if you passed, will essentially immediately get that CMMC level 2 certification when the rule comes. When it gets published.
So it's all set from day one.
Yeah. So to answer your question, Tim, we are doing assessments. We're just doing it with the DoD, and it's under this different kind of regulation, but should translate to kind of the first CMMC assessments.
And if it doesn't, I'd imagine even then it'd be a lot speedier assessment under the final rule. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's risk with all this stuff, right? Because it's the government and they have changed on this journey. I think, we try and tell our clients, we've put some contractual language in there that says, hey, look, our intent is to roll this thing over, in line with what the DoD said. Obviously, if something comes out that changes the way that has to happen, we're going to do right by you as long as nothing's changed with the scope standpoint, right? Like, essentially, this is kind of we're calling our CMC early bird assessment program. We're essentially saying, hey, we'll come in and do the assessment again at no additional cost, because it wasn't your fault that the DoD changed their mind, right? As long as there's not like a substantive change to where it's being scoped differently or something, and we do have to do a lot of rework, yes, I think it will be a pretty quick, follow-up assessment, and that's kind of how we're treating it.
Got it. Makes sense.
That's a great opportunity. So you've been talking and assessing a number of different organizations. Are there any trends, or is there a coalescence around certain areas that organizations are struggling the most with? Have you seen anything there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think
names.
Yeah, no names. Well, and organizations are at all different places in their journey for sure. I think one of the things that we see that is a very basic fundamental is actually scoping, right? And so the scoping guidance is out there in terms of how you categorize your assets and what is in scope for the assessment. And a lot of times what we find is, organizations or in general will want to just jump straight to kind of let's identify the gaps, or let's remediate, or let's assess, right? And it's like, well, actually, what we found is just a lot of them don't actually have the right scope and know their scope, right? And so we can't assess it until we know all of the people, all of the places and facilities, all of the systems that are in scope, and more importantly, all the ones that aren't in scope that we don't have to look at. And so I think it sounds very basic, but I think for a lot of organizations that we go into that aren't living and breathing this stuff every day, a scoping exercise is actually the most important part, and trying to kind of skip that just leads to a lot of rework and going back.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I was going to ask you how to prepare for one, but you answered that question right there. Figure out the scope before you go engage the C3PAO. It'll make the process go immensely faster.
What's from your perspective, the general tenor in the DIB right now in terms of how seriously that by and large they're taking this now going to the OMB? Are they, is anything changing? Are they, because I was talking yesterday with a consultant for manufacturers similar to you, but not a C3PAO. And basically he said a lot of them are just weighing, it's like bean counting. It's like, well, it's going to cost us this much to be certified. We have this much of contract. It's going to be this much of a fine, and just sort of like, what's the cheapest path here? Because we have options. Do you kind of see that as well?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, especially in the SMB market, we see a lot of like shopping early to try and figure out how much are these assessments going to cost, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the DoD is going to foot the bill for all this stuff, right? Assuming they get on the contract, the DoD is going to end up paying more on these contracts, and I think they know that. But yeah, we see some shopping. I think with the rule going, in the past 3-4 weeks, we have seen an uptick in inbound, right? I mean, we've been going 4+ years now. Right. It has been a constant, peaks and valleys in terms of pipeline and immediacy, and the prime. At first it was the DoD got the prime contractors to really, put a lot of information out there and kind of push their subs, right? And I think from a prime standpoint, right, if I'm a Lockheed or a Booz Allen or somebody that's one of these major big players, I mean, it's a serious risk if your supply chain, doesn't certify and can't now, you got to find, there's only so many suppliers with a lot of this stuff, especially with some of the other requirements around, U.S. sovereignty and things like that. So I think at first we saw the primes pushing it, and they're still pushing it because they want to, make sure that most of the defense industrial base is small businesses. But I think. Tim, your sentiment is the right one, that we see. We see one of two things. We see for those that are primarily defense contractors, I think they're just not messing around, and they're like, hey, something's coming, right? This is all aligned. I'm gonna have to do this. Like I'm gonna do the stuff at least that I know I have, because this is an out of business risk for me if I all of a sudden can't get contracts because they don't have certification, right? And some of them are even viewing it as a competitive advantage. Can I get this certification first? So therefore, my competitors, when I'm going after a contract, they actually can't bid on it yet because they're not certified. I think on the flip side, for those that maybe have a commercial business or maybe they're federal government contractors, but the DoD is only, whatever chunk it is, I think they're taking the more, kind of risk appetite, measuring the cost benefit analysis approach in terms of when is the right time to jump in on this and really commit to the costs and the burden that comes with doing this.
Are those primes, Chris, beginning to put the screws to their subcontractors because they know they need to get their house in order, just not themselves, but the subcontractors are working underneath them are going to need to comply as well? Are they putting them through the paces?
Yeah, I think what we see a lot of is questionnaires, right? So the primes, the reason the primes care is because in their contract with the government, the DoD, right? I mentioned that DFAR 7012 clause for CMMC. It's going to be 7021, 22, whatever. They have a requirement to flow down the exact clause, the exact requirements to any subcontractors that are going to process, transmit, or store, control, or classify information. So like it's actually a contractual obligation for them to flow down this clause. And what we see a lot of is, again, this isn't not in place. It's just a self-attestation, right? So DFAR 7012 and NIST 171. So we see a lot of questionnaires around, asking them to put on record, what is the status? Have you done this? What is your score? Right. And then ultimately, so that's how we see a lot of primes kind of almost like I don't want to call it a CYA, but it is a little bit to say like, hey, we want to make sure that you guys are taking this seriously and you're going to have to answer these questions. The other thing that I think is driving some of this for the primes and ultimately small businesses is when the DoD, when they pulled back the interim rule for CMMC 1.0, and they rolled out CMMC 2.0. They also rolled out DFAR 7019 and 20, right, which requires contractors. So today, before you can be awarded a contract, you have to report your self-assessment score, right? Or if you had somebody else do it, fine. Against NIST 800-171, you have to report it to the Supplier Performance Readiness System, SPRS. And if you look at, you listen to the attorneys and stuff, there's not a lot that the DoD can do with that score right now necessarily, except every company is now putting on record their self-attestation, right? And if something were to happen or whatever, right, like what we've started to see is companies be pursued under the False Claims Act, right? So this is kind of the in-between world where it's like, yeah, when they pulled back CMMC to say, hey, we're gonna take a little more time with this, they also did put a mechanism out there to say, under the current world, you still have to be doing all this stuff. And oh, by the way, now we're going to make you put on record. And I think, back to the question, I think the primes and some of the subs, that's become something that, they don't want to report a bad score, right? Like a negative score, but they also don't want to lie because they don't want to set themselves up for liability.
Now, you saw the assessment from Cybersheath where the majority think they're compliant, but in reality, based on the assessment from the DoD, they aren't. So that the False Claims Act is going to come into play, it sounds like, or folks need to take it seriously. Is it just they're unaware that they have those gaps in their environment, or are they prematurely reporting that they're compliant? What's driving that, do you think?
I mean, one thing that I think is relevant here is that, and this is a problem with the assessors as well. Like, we have a cybersecurity like talent problem to begin with, right? Like a bench in education, right? So in terms of technical talent, right, that can do this stuff. And so I think one of the things is just like, it's a big burden for especially a small business, right, to do this. And then how there's only so many folks out there that really know what they're doing, right? And that's growing, right? That's part of the mission of the Cyber AB, and a lot of this stuff is to build this talent base, right? But I think, if you don't have somebody really good who's telling you, who knows this stuff, right? It's like finance, right? I think cybersecurity really is kind of becoming the new finance in terms of like, we're starting to have audits, right? Starting to be reporting. As a business owner or board member, you're expected to understand the financial stuff, even if that's not your area of expertise. I think what we're starting to see is a shift towards them having to understand cybersecurity a little better than they do, and that shift's just going to take time because it's not a skill set that a lot of people have right now.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was getting at earlier. Is a lot of companies are just looking at the burden and sort of making the decision whether the burden is the juice worth the squeeze, or do we just risk the fine or risk the business because it's more expensive and more painful the other way, right?
Yeah. Well, and the thing with CMMC, at least if they stick, again, we'll see the statement of the final rule is, this is actually not going to be punitive. It's not like ITAR, right, which is a fine, right? There's fines in ITAR, which can be pretty significant. But CMMC, it's a sorry, you cannot get on this contract, right?
Right,
so
you lose the contract.
Yeah, and so yeah. So I think it'll be.
Isn't there fines if they say they are and they're not? I can't remember
the False Claims Act. I think
that's where you're getting into the false claims. Yeah. So Rocket Aerodyne was the big first one to kind of. I mean, the False Claims Act's been around a long time. It just wasn't typically used for cybersecurity. Right. And now you've started to see them under cybersecurity, the DOJ go after companies for false claims related to cyber.
Right, and that's kind of what I meant with the fines. Yeah. It's sort of make the claim, and if we get fined, at least we got the business. Stuff like that. It's just there's a lot of balancing in people's brains right now in the DIB on what's the least expensive path to outcome.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair to them, I mean, they've followed this journey like we have with all the starts and stops, and I think it's a balance. It's a risk calculation in terms of when you start and what you do and how you do it, and each company's got to make that decision for themselves.
So we spend a lot of time, obviously for good reason, talking about level 2. Anything going on with level 3, or it's just not, you're not thinking of, because it's the other
Yeah.
day on LinkedIn, this group, CMMC 2.0 information,
Yeah.
released an assessment guide for level 3. It was like 85 pages. And I'm not sure if that was, it couldn't have been fake, but we just can't, it looks like a draft. And help us understand what's going on right now with level 3.
Yeah, I mean, so level 3, the main difference between level 3 and level 2 is level 3, the DoD is actually going to assess. So that same DIBCAC who assessed us, they want to reserve the right for certain, high priority key supply chain partners to come in and say, you know what, we're going to do the assessment.
I see.
There hasn't been a ton of information on that because I think this is me, my analysis of it, but with 1.0 and then pulling back to 2.0, I think what the DoD has said is, hey, we got to focus a little bit here on getting something out that is, and start iterating on it. And one of the things that they kind of did is they said, hey, look, 3.0 it's going to be us with the DoD, right? So it's less about the whole ecosystem, and we'll get there. And they kind of punted that back. Nobody's seen what the final rule looks like that's at OMB right now. So maybe there is some stuff in there about it. I think from what we've, we're in meetings with the Cyber AB every Friday, right? The DoD joins from time to time. There's different groups the C3PAO's talk about. We all go through different, we're working with the DoD in terms of these joint voluntary assessments, right? People hear different things. Until we see something in writing, I think, with a grain of salt. But I think the focus right now is really on the level 2 stuff and getting that out.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah, that's the who knows is pretty much the sentiment across the industry right now. How, in terms of C3PAOs, how big is this ecosystem now? Are we talking hundreds, thousands of people? What choices the DIB has at their fingertips?
Yeah, at last check, there was like somewhere in the 40s. That could have gone up since a few weeks ago when I checked. Yeah, and I think we mentioned if this thing goes through OMB, they give it back to the DoD to roll out. I think that is one of the big challenges of this for the DoD is how they've said, hey, it's going to take 5 years, right? But how do you roll this out in a way to where you don't create a supply problem, right? So there's only whatever, let's say there's 50 C3PAOs, but there's 20,000 that need an assessment, in the next 3 months, right? Like the cost is going to go way up. Ultimately, the DoD is footing that bill, right? And so I think that is a real challenge that I imagine they've been thinking quite a bit about. When they do get the rule back, how are we going to do this in a measured way? And I mean, the other thing, which I think is why a lot of the push from everybody to start now and get going, right? And then the primes, and this has been going on for 4 years, is if you have a lot of failed assessments that takes folks out of the supply chain, right? You're just creating even more of a supply problem with C3PAOs because they're the only ones that can come back. They're going to have to reassess, right? Or they're going to have to do the Delta assessment, if they go into a POAM or something like that. So the practical rollout of this is no small challenge, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they go about it.
So if you're looking for a C3PAO, what types of things should a company ask? What do companies typically ask you when they're vetting you as an option?
Yeah, I think, I think one of the things that they care about is, at least on our C3PAO side of the business, we deal more with kind of the mid to large organizations. And I think some of the things that they look at is, this, I mentioned, let's just say there's 50 of us C3PAOs right now. There's kind of three types of companies that are C3PAO, right? There's like the kind of the mom and pop kind of small, or maybe it's just one person and maybe they use contractors and, and they're, some of those are really good assessors, right? Like they really know this stuff. Maybe they used to work, but they're limited in terms of their kind of their capacity, and their experience, is what it is, right? You don't have multiple people kind of building to an experience pool. Then you've got kind of the bigger player, right? Like your more traditional kind of bigger consulting firms, which we've actually worked and seen a lot, in that let's take a Deloitte or a Booz Allen or an Accenture, for example, right? They're your more traditional consulting. They're going to have these arms. They do, FedRAMP, that kind of stuff. This is just a business line added to them. And they're just, they've been doing this stuff. And then you've got kind of the middle thing, which is where we fall, which is, we've got a lot of those big business people that are now on our team doing this. And we think that, we're providing that same quality, but at a middle price. But I think that you asked what they're asking about. I think for the ones that we are going into, which is more the mid and large size, right, or academic organizations, things like that, risk is probably the biggest thing to them. Price always matters to an extent, but this is so new. It's new. They want to lower their risk from an assessment standpoint as much as possible, right? They don't want somebody in there that doesn't know what they're doing, right? That doesn't have the technical aptitude to understand the complexity of their environment, right? Especially you start to get into some of these academic organizations or larger ones, like it gets really complex really fast just to figure out scoping. And so I think proving your technical aptitude and like, hey, I get this, I get what it's like to have a large complex organization that does commercial business, federal business, DoD business, this kind of stuff. And then also like the experience to say, hey, I believe that you're gonna assess this correctly, and we're not going to end up in an adjudication situation where we're having to kind of push back, and this becomes a business risk for us, and it didn't have to. So I think for us, it's that. I think at the small, we still, I mentioned on the managed services side, we deal with a lot of the SMB. I think for them, a lot of it is price shopping. I think a lot of it's price shopping,
which makes sense. Now, you guys do more than just CMMC when it comes to third-party assessments. You do ITAR, you do ISO, maybe SOC. Talk a bit about that side of the business and what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I think we have our team, our folks, right? Like are all assessed in other standards, right? That was just a decision that we made, that we want, we want folks that are really experienced in cybersecurity assessments and doing this, which has helped, I think, in terms of, as CMMC evolves and we're on the CAP working group and providing feedback and stuff like that. Because a lot of this, you don't need to FedRAMP, right? Which you guys are intimately familiar with. Let's not reinvent the wheel if we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's things that work in these other assessment things. I think what we've seen is the reciprocity conversation is a really interesting one. Hopefully that comes out with the final rulemaking. The DoD has said the intent is for there to be reciprocity with FedRAMP, at least. What that looks like, TBD. But I think every other standard, especially like the commercial ones that aren't backed by like a government organization, so like the high trust and stuff, they are chomping at the bit to get reciprocity with CMMC and the DoD and the federal government because it legitimizes their standards, I think. So, what we're seeing is all this stuff is not exactly the same, right? There's different flavors, but security controls are security controls. Evaluating them is evaluating them. And I think, hopefully the different bodies that support these can come up with some reciprocity arrangements, because as fun as mapping security controls is and trying to say prove equivalency and all this stuff, it's a lot of effort for something that probably could be figured out in a room if they got together and hashed it out.
Well, I guess we're all just sitting on our thumbs here for a couple more months and see what happens.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think we're at the end of this run in terms of indecision, right? Because the Biden administration, it's almost like they got a printing press for requirements right now in cybersecurity and executive orders, and this just falls right in line. So
yeah. And you've seen, who was it? Was it Homeland Security or Department of Health just came out with a CUI, protecting CUI thing, right? There's C2M2 is a new one. So I don't think this is going away. The federal government cares about protecting information that they consider proprietary and label controlled, right, in this case, and give to their contractor base. And so how that evolves, you would have to imagine, or you would hope that all the agencies, I mean, CUI, controlled and classified information in and of itself is managed at the National Archives, right? And each agency has to have their own kind of CUI program, CUI program. You would hope that the same thing in terms of like protecting it and frameworks and models that they end up aligning to, so you don't have, each agency having its own flavor. And I think that will eventually happen. It's just a matter of how quickly.
The entire government supply base is at risk, just not the DIB. To your point, you can see the applicability of this standard across.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of the DIB also works on other federal contracts, right? Like so make it easy for them to not don't make it more of a burden to have to comply with two different flavors of the same thing, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
You spoke about FedRAMP. There's one last point on that. I know we're about out of time, but it'd be interesting to get your perspective in terms of you're seeing various tools that are used by the different contractors who are coming to you for assessments. Having FedRAMP moderate, does that help? What's the those who claim they have FedRAMP equivalent? Is that really the case? Is that a problem? What's your perception?
Yeah, so I mean, and this is going back to what we said. This is a requirement today. I cannot stress that enough, right? If defense contractors have the DFAR 7012 clause in there, it says if you are processing, transmitting, or storing controlled and classified information, right, in the public cloud, right? So Microsoft, Kiteworks, all of the above, Zoom, any of that, right? That you have to, it has to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent, right? And so if you are doing that as a contractor, it is a no-brainer, and you want to continue to use the public cloud, right? Like it's just a no-brainer. You got to do it. It makes no sense. The equivalency thing. So yeah, you can go out and have a FedRAMP 3PAO, do an equivalent assessment to you and give it to you, right? But again, we've yet to see what reciprocity will look like, and if that will even be taken by the government, right? Because they're not, you guys went through the FedRAMP process, right? There's the 3PAO involved, but there's also, A2LA, which is and the FedRAMP 3PAO that accepts all of these assessments, and the agency that's sponsoring you, right? So the government has a body that is regulating those assessments and approving them in the FedRAMP 3PAO. You take them out, right? And is the government really going to give credit for this? So I think, look, equivalency can be proven. You can do the mapping of the controls. If a vendor's willing to work with you, you can get there. It is a hell of a lot of work.
Right.
And until we see that reciprocity rule, I don't know that it I would be worried about the risk that you're putting yourself at. So I think, and again, this is already written in the DFAR 7012. So what we kind of tell clients is, hey, if you want to use, you don't have to use the public cloud, right? You can do on-premise stuff. You can do, closed cloud, in a AWS GovCloud or something. But if you want to do that, right, which for the SMBs is pretty big that they want to, because it's the most cost-effective way.
Right.
There's just no reason to not use FedRAMP moderate or above.
Yeah.
We would agree.
Yes.
It's quite an investment, right? As you guys know, it's not a small process to go through the FedRAMP authorization. It's a heavy cost. Like it's a commitment to say, hey, we are committed to doing things right. And
no, it is a heavy cost. Time. I mean, it's our CISO. You could probably spend an hour talking about how much work goes into that. And how much money. So
absolutely.
So, Chris, for any organization out there who is interested in engaging or finding out more about Ariento, where should they go? How do they engage with you and start that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, Ariento.com is the best. Our website's the best. If it's specific to CMMC, Ariento.com/CMMC. And like I said, we've got kind of two sides of our business, two folks to talk to. One's kind of the managed services side. Hey, we've got some solutions that'll kind of get you compliant. The other's the more advisory consulting C3PAO side, which they can either help you prepare, with readiness and gap assessments, or the actual joint surveillance right now, but eventually the C3PAO assessment. So
that's great. Well, we're out of time. We appreciate all your time today, the thoughtful responses, the ideas and suggestions that you had for businesses in the marketplace. We look forward to having you on a future Kitecast episode, continuing this conversation. For anyone out there who would like to check out other Kitecast episodes, you can go to kiteworks.com/Kitecast. There's a bunch of great podcasts just like this one that you can listen to and download. Have a great day.